There are lives that begin not with a cry, but with a protocol. Yours began in a secured maternity ward in Brooklyn, armed men on every floor, nurses whispering, a doctor who left with an envelope of $40,000 in unmarked bills, no paperwork, no questions. When your first cry echoed down the corridor, one of the men simply nodded to your father. A bottle of 1996 Bordeaux was uncorked, worth more than most families' monthly rent. Before your first week ended, a gold pendant of St. Cecilia hung above your crib, blessed by a priest your family had funded for decades. None of it was your doing, but it had already claimed you. A kingdom disguised as a childhood. You grew up behind the gates of an 11,000-square-foot estate on Staten Island's South Shore, Sicilian marble fountain, lemon trees planted at your grandmother's request, a private chapel, a kitchen that was never allowed to sit empty because in your bloodline an empty table was an insult. On paper, the house was worth nearly $5 million. Your father bought it in 1989 for a fraction of that. The difference was built with money that had never touched a bank. You had every luxury imaginable, except the freedom to be ordinary. Education behind closed doors. You never attended a traditional school. Tutors from an elite Catholic institution came 3 times a week, paid triple their rate for one condition: silence. You spent afternoons with your cousins, the children of your father's closest associates. They let you win every game, not out of kindness, but because they understood hierarchy long before you did. The kitchen and the code. Your earliest clear memory, your grandmother rolling fresh pasta while 4 broad-shouldered men drank espresso in silence. They called you Principessa. Your father was affectionate. He braided your hair on Sundays, read you Italian folklore at night. But there was another side, the hardened expression during certain phone calls, the strangers who arrived before dawn and disappeared, your mother making the sign of the cross after they left. She never explained. She didn't need to. Your mother, the silent lesson. She married your father at 19, beautiful, composed. She never questioned the money, but her hands told the truth. At Mass, her rosary beads moved too fast. When your father left at odd hours, she stood at the window until his headlights returned. She never admitted fear. She taught you something without saying it. In your world, love meant swallowing terror and serving dinner anyway. The question. At 8 years old, you asked, "What does Dad actually do?" Your mother said, "He takes care of us. Construction, restaurants, sanitation." You wanted to believe her, but you had counted 14 cameras on the property. You'd seen thick envelopes exchanged in back rooms. You'd noticed how grown men greeted your father, respectful, careful. You understood more than they realized. Raised in duality. Your father insisted on education. He said, "You will be legitimate. You will be sharper than all of them." You learned Italian, literature, art history, advanced math. You fell in love with architecture. But you absorbed a second education too. Silence carries power. Family is a contract. Generosity and violence can live in the same man. The dinner. At 12, your father brought you to a closed restaurant in Little Italy. 25 men stood when he entered. He didn't introduce you. He placed his hand on your shoulder and guided you to the head of the table. No words were necessary. You were no longer just a child. You were the daughter. The counselor. Soon after, you met the family's chief counsel, silver-haired, precise, untouchable. "This man," your father said, "has protected us more than any soldier." The counselor explained his role simply. Your father builds structures. Some of the capital comes from places the government wouldn't approve of. I make sure that by the time it becomes real estate, no one can trace it." "Isn't that dishonest?" you asked. "Yes," he replied calmly, "but it keeps your family intact." Two worlds. Summers on the Amalfi Coast, in a villa purchased through an offshore trust. Then September, armored SUVs and security briefings. At 15, your father gave you a black Mercedes S-Class with ballistic glass. Watch your mirrors, always know your exit. Freedom was never free, it was monitored. Understanding the machine. At the top, your father. Below him, captains. But the real power rested on structure. Construction firms, restaurants inflating revenue, waste management contracts worth tens of millions, real estate layered through shell corporations in Delaware, Nevada, the Cayman Islands. By the time you were old enough to grasp scale, you understood this wasn't chaos.
It was architecture. Columbia. At 18, you enrolled at Columbia University. Tuition paid through a scholarship foundation your family controlled. On paper, you were simply a talented young woman from a prosperous Italian-American family. You loved architecture. And then you met him. A boy from Connecticut, old money, soft voice, weekend urges, sailing stories. He found your family charmingly traditional. He didn't know your apartment had hidden surveillance, that your phone was linked to men who could reach you in 4 minutes, that your father's nightly call wasn't affection, it was protocol. One night, lying beside him, you almost told him everything. The truth rose to your throat. You swallowed it. That's when you understood. Real intimacy wasn't permitted in your world. The numbers. The counselor eventually showed you scale. Roughly $350 million in annual revenue. After costs, lawyers, compensation, political donations, loyalty, around $140 million remained. $90 million could be filtered into legitimacy. $50 million existed only as physical cash, stored in walls, safes, buried containers. Money that couldn't be deposited, couldn't be spent openly. Some of it literally decayed each year. The hardest part, the counselor said, is not making it, it's cleaning it. An office in Midtown, 8 specialists, dozens of shell companies, deposits under federal reporting limits, endless structuring. A silent war against institutions with infinite resources. The performance. By 23, your public image was flawless. Architectural symposiums, philanthropic galas, a foundation awarding scholarships, magazine profiles praising your vision. Every detail true and entirely constructed. You weren't pretending to be someone else. You were pretending to be the version of yourself that might have existed without your last name. The performance began to hollow you out. What power costs. Your father, at 58, looked older. White hair, a Beretta on one bedside table, a rosary on the other. Federal investigation survived, a betrayal uncovered. He was still powerful, but power had carved itself into his face. Your mother still watched the driveway at night, still prayed too fast. She had become a portrait of your possible future. The counselor's warning. One evening, long after the guests had left, the counselor spoke plainly. I graduated top of my class. I could have worked anywhere. Instead, I've spent 35 years making your family look legitimate. A pause. I can't leave, not because I'd be harmed, but because I know everything. That makes me valuable. Another pause. And it makes me captive. He looked at you carefully. It wasn't confession, it was a warning. The truth you carry,
You are the daughter of a man who rules a world that officially doesn't exist. You were raised in a fortress disguised as a home. You have protection, wealth, loyalty, but never anonymity. You wake each morning in a carefully curated apartment, dress in carefully chosen clothes, step into a carefully engineered life. You play the role of a woman who earned everything through intellect and discipline alone. And sometimes, for a few fleeting hours, you almost believe it. Almost.